Good morning, friends. If you want to grab your seats, we're going to get started on the final day of the Waste Management Symposium. Yes, thank you, my one fist pump friend. You've been consistent these 3 days. I really appreciate that. Not everyone went for Crazy Shirt Friday. I maybe went too hard, but that's fine. There is one, yes. And a school uniform, which counts as crazy, absolutely. Welcome to Friday, friends. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that this symposium is happening on Larrakia land. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For some of you, you're heading back home today or later on in the next couple of days. So if you are travelling around the territory, please keep safe and take back some of the information from this symposium to your beautiful communities, and hopefully some of it's been really useful and insightful, and there's been some good connections that you've gotten out of it. Have a wonderful jam-packed half day of conversations about exposing the sexy in waste management, which has been really explained to people, because I posted a photo of the image and people were like, oh, what's sexy about waste management? So many things. So many things. No, it's been great. I hope that you've come away with some really great things from this, and follow up afterwards as well. Speaking of things for following up and for that kind of reflection, on your tables you will find an evaluation form throughout this morning. If you wouldn't mind filling that out so that we've got some feedback for future symposiums, that would be great. If you are one of those people that has to leave us at morning tea time, please make sure that you do your evaluation form before you leave. I think it's really important to provide feedback because it helps everyone get better at what they do. It's an important thing. Speaking of people who are doing great things, it's probably a good opportunity for us to acknowledge and thank the Northern Territory Government. We've got the logo up there at the moment because NTG actually funded Meredith's position to coordinate this wonderful symposium. So technically they're the funding group that helped make this happen. So if you wouldn't mind, can we please thank the Northern Territory Government and the Department of Environment? Great. All right, so in terms of housekeeping, toilets have not moved in the space of 24 hours, and neither has our emergency muster point. If anyone needs anything, please feel free to ask. Eat the delicious chocolates, because if you don't, that's my job for the end of the day, and I probably shouldn't do that. I will, don't challenge me. I'll eat all of the remaining chocolates, but you should probably have a go as well today. Other than that, the only thing I'd like to re-plug is that Asbestos Awareness Week is on the 23rd to the 29th of November. Please make sure it's in the calendars. If you need any resources or information, if you go to asbestossafety.gov.au, there's some information there about some of the things that you can get involved in or do in your local communities. All right, great. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 presentations left of this amazing symposium, friends. This is going to be great. Are you pumped? Are you excited? Friday? Yeah, that was better than Thursday. I'll take that. We've just leveled up each time. It's good. I'm impressed by all of you. All right. So you know how this works. I bring somebody up here to present. You go absolutely wild as if it's your favorite rock star, and then we learn amazing things about waste management. Your first presenter today, back by popular demand, I guess, doing an encore performance, if you will. Can you please put your hands together and welcome back to the front, presenting on the reality of licensing. It's the wonderful Janna Poortinga.
Thank you. Do I just, oh, yeah, it works. All right, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So last year at the symposium, for those who were there, the NTPA did a presentation on licensing, basically for remote landfills, focused on remote landfills. And I've been asked to come here today, this year, to talk about the reality of licensing from a local government perspective. So as I said yesterday, I work for 5 councils, and I get a lot of questions around licensing of remote landfills. I also feel there's a lot of resistance and unknown things about landfill licensing. So I just thought I'd put all my information together in a presentation and hopefully you'll learn something from it. So we'll start with a few facts. Your landfill needs to be licensed if you service more than 1,000 people, or if you accept listed waste on a fee-for-service basis, or if you operate commercially. A fee-for-service basis includes charging for waste through council waste levies or rates. So basically, if you operate a landfill and accept listed waste, you will need a license. Some other facts, the Waste Management and Pollution Control Act, Sections 12, talks about our general environmental duty. It basically says each of us, we're not allowed to pollute the environment. If you do, for some reason, pollute the environment, you have to minimize the environmental harm and reduce any waste resulting from the pollution. So basically, if you're operating a landfill, in itself, it's polluting the environment, so it's your responsibility to minimize the environmental harm. So something I hear quite often from the councils is, I don't want to get licensed because the NTPA just wants to control us. They want to charge extra costs and they want to impose future restrictions. And I don't think that's the way to look at it, because really, like I said, it's your responsibility to minimize its environmental impact. So really what it is a mechanism for councils to demonstrate that they are doing the right thing. And at the same time, it is a mechanism for the NTPA to see where guidance is needed, because in all the documents that you provide, they can see where there are gaps and where the council should get some extra guidance. So if you do licensed, what do you have to do? So the first thing, and which is oftentimes quite challenging for a lot of remote regions, is to get ownership of the land. You cannot get a license if you don't own the land or lease the land, for example, through Section 19 lease. And you're basically not allowed to operate the land if you don't have some form of lease. And once you've got that, you have to prepare an environmental management plan. So what exactly is an environmental management plan? I've prepared one recently, so I'll just give some examples of what you can include in an environmental management plan. So there should be some site information and background. So where is your site located? What's the history of the site? How long has it been used? Where has waste been buried in the past? Who owns the land, as I said already? What's the weather like? So how much evaporation is there? How much rainfall is there? What's the average temperature? What does the soil beneath the soil look like? So where are the aquifers? What's basically the risks with what's happening beneath the soil? What's happening on top of the soil? So where does the water that falls onto the soil go? And how does that relate to where your landfill is? And where is it located compared to other things in the environment? For example, residential areas, waterways, sacred sites, national parks, airports, or private properties. So based on that information, you can create a conceptual site model. So a conceptual site model basically shows all your inflows in the system and where it goes. So in this example, you can see that there is waste being buried at a site. You can get a fire, you can get rain, you can have a biodegradation of waste, which can lead to landfill gas, to leachate, and to toxic smoke. And that in turn impacts the people, waterways, animals, and the soil and plants. And basically for every activity that's on the site, so if there's waste that's uncovered, that can lead to litter. Listed waste that you have on your site can lead to spills, or clear land, for example, that can lead to a lot of dust formation. So then you should include something about your landfill operations. So what are your opening hours? What are your contact details? How many staff are working there and what do they do? What kind of equipment do you have and what do you use it for? What is the layout of your site and where is the fencing, where is signage, all of that sort of information. And you should also include information about the waste that you actually accept on your site and how you store this waste and what eventually happens to the waste. So does it go into landfill? Do you transport it elsewhere? Or does it go for recycling, for example? And then you have to include information about how do you operate your landfill cell, how often do you cover it, how much soil are you using, where does your soil come from, that sort of information. And then you also have to include some information about the staging of your landfill. So you have to know right now, what are you going to do if this cell is full? What's going to happen next? Because you don't want to be digging a hole here and digging a hole there and not really have any clue what you're doing. And that will also sort of give a lifespan of the landfill. And obviously in this example, we're talking about a time of 20 years, and a lot can happen in those 20 years. But it's just so that you have an idea of what's going to happen to that site and when you should start looking for alternative options. And then also you should include some information about how you're going to record the waste that's coming in. And if you have a really clear overview of how your landfill is staging and how much waste goes into each cell, those estimates are pretty easy to make for remote landfills, because obviously, you know, we're not going to have a very expensive weighbridge on each landfill site there. And also inspection lists of your inspections of the landfill site, and a strategy of how you're going to avoid waste going into landfill. And then there's environmental management. So basically what happens with litter that's coming from the site, what's happening with pests and weeds, and how do you maintain your fire breaks. Then there's the emergency response. So basically, in case of an emergency, what is the responsibility of each staff member? What are their contact details? What do you do in case of a medical emergency? What do you do in case of a fire, an extreme weather event, a spill or a leak? What happens if there's a prohibited waste illegally dumped on your site? What happens when there's ponding of water in your landfill cell? Or what are you going to do if your equipment breaks down? And then based on all this information, a risk assessment can be done. And that basically talks about all the risks that are associated with the landfill. So for example, leachate, fire, dust, litter, stormwater, landfill gas. Who's going to be impacted by those risks? So there's going to be people, air quality, soil quality, water quality, etc. And then based on how likely something is to occur, combined with how severe the consequences are, you basically can come to a risk. So if there's a low risk, that basically means that the event doesn't really need any specific attention. If there's a moderate risk, it means that you have to monitor for enhancing circumstances. So if, for example, leachate has a moderate risk, you should be monitoring for ponding of water in your landfill cell, because that will enhance leachate production. If there's a significant risk, you should actually monitor the risk event itself. So in case of leachate, you should be monitoring the water quality to see if there's leachate occurring in your water. If there's a high risk, it's something that requires immediate attention, immediate investigation. If it's an extreme risk, it requires immediate action and immediate cleanup. So once you've established what the risk factors for your site are, that will help you determine what you need to monitor. So basically, if litter and leachate are high risk for your site, they will definitely need to be included in your monitoring plan. So for example, in case of litter, your monitoring plan could be that every week you will do an inspection of around the site to see how much litter there is, and then you'll know whether the event is occurring or not. And then there's the closure and post-closure. Usually once you get close to that stage, it will be a more comprehensive report. But basically in the initial environmental management plan, if it's still far away, you have to have some sort of idea of what your site's going to look like once you're done with it, once it's full, and how it fits in with the environment. So here you can see some contour lines of the site that I've been working on and how that looks in how it fits in with the rest of the landscape. So you can see that before it's already quite a hilly area, and that extra little hill from the landfill doesn't really change the landscape, and therefore the impact is not that large. And also it should be kept in mind what you're going to use the landfill site for in the future. So I've actually heard of multiple communities in my areas where there are housing development plans on top or next to an old landfill. You can't do that. That's very dangerous. And then there's also a communication and consultation plan. So that basically talks about who are your stakeholders, how are you engaging with them, how can people ask questions or put in complaints, how are you registering those complaints, how do you communicate with the community and engage with them, get feedback from them, and how do you train your staff. And then, and this is not something that's mentioned by the EPA to include in an environmental management plan, but I think it is good practice to do this because a lot of the landfills that we're talking about, if there's a significant risk for leachate, you're not going to have a monitoring plan in place in like a couple of months because it's just too extensive to go through that process. So basically what the EPA wants to see is that you're committing to making improvements. So if you say, you know, in 3 years' time, we're going to install bores at our site, you can include that in your environmental management plan. So the EPA will see that you're actually committed to make those changes. And it is also a way for them to actually see whether you're on track with all the things that you're planning to do. So that's what's happening before licensing. So during licensing, I hear a lot of people say, I don't want to be licensed because there's too much paperwork involved. So, you know, I just don't want to do that. It's too much work. So let's have a look at what is involved with having a license. You have to do an annual report, and an annual report basically includes the waste volumes that you've received over the past year, non-conformances and any action that you've taken, any complaints that you've gotten, monitoring condition of the site per the latest site inspection, landfill staging, and any waste that has been removed from the site. And this is information that you should be keeping track of anyway. So it may sound like a lot, but any well-managed site would have this information readily available anyway. And also considering, because you will have the aftercare of the site as well, which is a long period, which is going to be an expensive period as well. The more information you get while you're operating the site, the better, the easier it is to get an aftercare plan, a good aftercare plan, and you will save money in the future. Then if, for example, litter is a significant risk and you need to be monitoring it, you have to be doing a monitoring report on that to see how bad this risk actually is for your site. So include information like a method, results, quality of results, the discussion and interpretation and conclusion and proposed action. In some cases, for example, if we're talking about water sampling, it will have to be done by a qualified person, and the monitoring report will need to be certified by that person. And then there's also incident reports. If something is happening on your site that shouldn't be happening, you should report it to the EPA. That's just a couple of clicks on the website, so it's really easily done. And it's also not a shaming thing. It's more of an information giving thing. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, I don't want to report this because I don't want to give the so many thing that is going on. And especially for the bigger towns, it's basically if the EPA gets a call from a resident in that area saying, you know, there's a fire going on a landfill site, they want to be able to say, yes, we know about that. The council is on top of it. It's just a green waste fire. You don't have anything to worry about. So it's just that information giving, and that's what the incidents report are mostly about. Other direction. So then I hear quite often, I don't want to be licensed because it's too expensive. So let's have a look at the costs. There are fixed costs, which are application fee, annual fee, license amendment fee, and renewal fee. And then there are variable costs, which are population service fee and listed waste handled fee. So this is a bit chaotic. What does that look like? For example, if your landfill is servicing 200 people and you're receiving 125 tires a year, the first year you will have to pay an application fee and an annual fee. And then the following years of your license, you will have to pay an annual fee and a listed waste handled fee. And I don't think that's an excessive amount of money. Another example, if it's a bigger community, 2,000 people, and we're getting 800 tires, what happens then? There's still the application fee at the start, then the annual fee, a population service fee, and a listed waste handled fee. Again, not a really excessive amount, in my opinion. So then I hear quite often, I just won't accept listed waste because then I don't need licensing. You can do that, but that means that you're operating your facility to suit your licensing desires. So if your community has tires that they want to get rid of and you're not providing the opportunity for them to do so, there's a very big chance it's just going to be illegally dumped somewhere. If it's going to be dumped on council land, you still have to deal with it. You still, because you're not licensed to store it anywhere, so you still have to get someone in to get rid of your tires there. So we have to step away from the idea of suiting our licensing desires and operate the facility to suit communities' needs. That way you will reduce illegal dumping, you will minimize the harm to the environment, and you will also avoid some very big fines that you can get from the EPA. Then I hear quite often, the EPA won't fine us because they've never done so in the past. I like to get your attention to a map that they provided last year in the presentation. This map shows the priority remote landfills that they're focusing on. They want to see these communities licensed as soon as possible. So and this was a year ago, so if you're on this map and you're not licensed yet, or you're not on your way to licensing, I would be getting worried because it wouldn't surprise me if the EPA will knock on your doorstep soon. And if you're not on this map, this was a year ago, so over time you will be next on the list. Then I hear very often, it's not realistic to expect all remote landfills to be compliant. And I just want to look back 10 years in time. So in between 2010 and 2015, there was basically an increased awareness of environmental issues around waste. And as a result of that, some simple changes were made to landfills to reduce the environmental impact, things that were easy to do and cheap. Also, there was an establishment of regional working groups for the regional councils to talk about waste. And a lot of councils have been incorporating environmental officers in their workforce. So this was really a stage of awareness. And then the following 5 years, I think most regional councils here in the room have actually received a grant for their waste management. There have been a lot of successful funding applications and some major changes have been made to waste management infrastructure. And also there's been a further increased awareness of issues and associated costs. So basically, we've had that awareness stage, we've had that action stage. So now we're really getting to the compliance and licensing stage. And it is also important to keep up with the trend that is happening because there is more to come. We've discussed some of these things already briefly during the last 2 days, but there's legacy waste sites. Most communities have multiple legacy waste sites. These need proper rehabilitation and need to be properly cleaned up, and that will come at a really high cost. So once we get to that stage that we will tackle these sites, that's actually going to be really expensive. Also, we touched upon the waste levy. It might maybe not happen in the coming few years, but in the long run, we can definitely expect it to be there. I think New South Wales waste levy is around $100 a ton. So yeah, if you compare that to the waste that you're receiving, that's a significant cost. So when that happens, you better be prepared for it than surprised. And then the other thing is that at the moment, licensing is based on population and on what kind of waste you're receiving. But it's very, very likely that in the future, it will be based on risks instead of population. So that means that if you are operating a landfill for only 50 people, but your landfill is located in a swamp, you will need licensing. If your landfill is located next to a residential area, you will need licensing. If it's next to an airport, you will need licensing. So, instead of just waiting for that to happen, it's better to just follow with the trend and get on top of things now and not be surprised when it happens. So if after all of this you still don't want to be licensed, that's okay. You can ask the EPA for an exemption. In order to do that, you need to prove that you are not polluting the environment. In order to do that, basically you need everything that I just talked about. So basically a whole environmental management plan. But it's not just that, it's more, because you need to prove that you're not polluting the environment. So you actually need to measure every risk event that can possibly occur with your site. So you need to do leachate monitoring, you need to do landfill gas monitoring, you need to monitor your litter, all of that to prove that you're not polluting the environment. So it's actually way more work to not be licensed. And you have to remember, you're doing an activity that pollutes the environment. So it is up to you to prove that you're minimizing this impact. It is your responsibility, and you shouldn't just wait for the EPA to knock on your doorstep and to get caught. And it's basically the same with driving a car. If you want to get a license for your car, you need to prove that you actually know how to drive a car. And if you're gonna drive around without a license and you get in an accident or you get caught, the consequences of that are actually way bigger than if you would have a license. And that basically works the same for your landfill. So I'm sorry for all this seriousness on a Friday morning, but I hope some of you have learned some things. And if there's any questions or no time for questions.
Good. There is time for questions. Did anyone have any? Yeah, that works.
Thanks. This is probably more comments than questions. And Janna, that was a really, really good presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Except if I thought you were employed by the 5 councils. It sounded more like an EPA presentation.
I know. And I don't work for the EPA. It's just, you know.
and I guess you gave us both sides of the argument, you know, and I guess I'm still on the other side, why we wouldn't want to
I
be.
know, yes.
Thank goodness our largest community is only 999 people. So, but we do accept a whole pile of waste. And for the reasons that you were saying, but there's one little correction. The illegal dumping won't end up on council land. It ends up back on Aboriginal Land Trust.
Yep.
Because the council doesn't own the land. All we do is lease our buildings and facilities to operate from. So I was making a number of notes as you went through there, but I guess what we try to do in all of our councils, we don't have the rate space. I think Peter or someone mentioned the other day, there are significant and onerous compliance requirements to being a licensed facility. The cost, you're right, there's not much in the cost. That's the easy part. We work in our area, we have 13 remote communities across 4 language groups. English is probably the 3rd language spoken on all of our communities. The compliance requirements are very onerous. All it does is require kind of non-Indigenous employees to have to be recruited just to do the compliance requirements of this. So that's a big issue for us. We've tend to work towards best practice. We separate goods. We store it for long-term removal one day if we can ever sort out the old tyranny of distance and dirt roads and remote areas. But yeah, I think basically, I guess I'll be on that one side of the fence that would oppose it. And just because last year, I think we had the discussion and it was all stick, no carrot. This forum, we've talked about honey versus vinegar or something like that. Mm-hmm. The EPA still seems to be based on the stick or the vinegar approach. And I don't really see that there's been much encouragement there in assistance from the EPA to help us in remote areas.
Oh, Anna's back.
I also thought that was a brilliant presentation, Janna. Thank you. Also a comment rather than a question. We have 2 communities, one that are at that population threshold. So we're moving towards licensing and had to engage an external consultant to do our environmental management plans. And so we went, well, if we're going to fly some consultants all the way to East Arnhem Land, let's get them done for all of our sites, even the ones that are below the population threshold for licensing. So that's exactly what we did. Highly recommend it. Even if you're not going to go to licensing, I would still strongly recommend getting your environmental management plans done. They are a document that basically just spells out to us what we need to do and when we need to have it done by. We included a performance improvement plan in our environmental management plans, and I can then now go to council to budget for those things. So That's just my 2 cents.
Any further questions, friends? No? Great. Well, then can we please thank Anne for that presentation?